When the new nanny disappears without a word, a baby's cry echoes through a marble mansion, and a quiet cleaner makes a choice that breaks every rule. In a gleaming kitchen under cold chrome and colder expectations, Linda lifts little Nathan into the sink and turns duty into love. Minutes later, the door swings open. His father, millionaire David Cole, stares stunned. Is this defiance or salvation? What follows will test pride-shatter class lines and reveal the one truth money can't buy: presence. Tonight, A House of Glass learns what a home feels like. Stay with us, because the moment Nathan reaches out and says a word he's never said before, everything changes. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. Let's see our global family light up. And if stories of heart culture and hard-won redemption move, you tap subscribe and join our African stories. A community, so you never miss the next chapter. The Cole mansion sat on the edge of the city like a fortress of glass and steel, its wide windows catching every glint of the morning Sunday. Inside, silence should have meant peace. But on this morning, silence was pierced by a raw, desperate cry. The sound echoed through the grand hallways, bouncing off marble floors and gilded frames, seeping into every corner of the house. Linda froze. She had been dusting the tall bookshelves in the study when she first heard it. The cry wasn't a fuss or a whimper. It was sharp, aching, the kind of cry that spoke of hunger, discomfort, and neglect. Dropping her feather duster, she hurried across the hall and up the wide staircase. Her heart thudded as she reached little Nathan's nursery. There he was, just a year and a half old, red-faced, tiny fists, balled up, his diaper sagging and soaked. The smell told her he had been in this state for hours. Linda's throat tightened. She had been in the Cole household for 3 years, moving like a shadow, cleaning surfaces no one noticed, polishing silver that no one touched. She had been told her role clearly: housekeeper, not caregiver. The nannies had always been in charge of Nathan, but today the crib was empty of comfort. The nanny, a woman named Sylvia, was gone. On the dresser lay a short note written in rushed, almost guilty strokes: I resign. I won't be coming back. Linda's hands trembled as she lifted Nathan into her arms. His cries softened at once, his small head burrowing into her shoulder. The sudden weight of him, so trusting, so desperate, unlocked something she had buried for years. She remembered holding her own daughter, Sophie, before the courts decided she wasn't fit to be a mother because she had no money, no stability, no husband. That memory always cut her like glass. What did they do to you, sweet boy? She whispered, kissing Nathan's damp hair. How could they leave you like this? She had to clean him to comfort him. But the nursery bathroom had only a shower, far too rough for a child this small. The main bathtub was upstairs on the family's private floor, strictly forbidden. Linda's eyes darted around, her heart racing. She couldn't wait. Nathan's skin was already rashy, his sobs raw. So she carried him down the sweeping staircase, whispering softly, rocking him with instinctive tenderness. In the grand kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel appliances and spotless counters, her eyes fell on the deep sink. It wasn't right, but it was safe. It was better than leaving him in misery. She filled the basin with warm water, testing it carefully with her elbow, recalling lessons she had learned long ago, helping neighbors' children in the poor district where she grew up. This will feel nice, Nathan. We're going to wash away all the hurt. The little boy quieted as she undressed him gently, his tiny hands reaching for the water as it streamed. He giggled when she splashed his fingers, the first sound of joy that morning. Linda smiled through tears, humming a lullaby she once sang to Sophie. For a moment, she felt whole again, like she was giving love not just to Nathan, but to the daughter she had lost. And then the kitchen door swung open. David Cole stepped inside, still in his dark suit from an early return flight. He was only 35, but his sharp jaw and cold gaze carried the weight of boardrooms and deals sealed in skyscrapers. He had left Washington, D.C. earlier than planned, thinking he would surprise his son. Instead, the surprise was his housekeeper sleeves rolled up, cradling his heir in a sink like some back alley bath. He froze. His expensive shoes clicked against the tiles as his voice cut the air. What is the meaning of this? Linda startled, nearly letting Nathan slip. She held him tight, her eyes wide. Mr. Cole, I can explain. Explain. His voice thundered, echoing against the steel counters. You are bathing my son in the kitchen sink. Who gave you permission? Nathan whimpered at his father's tone, clutching Linda's damp uniform. But when she whispered soothing words, he calmed. David watched unsettled. His son rarely calmed so easily. The nanny, Linda stammered. She left. She wrote a note. Nathan had been crying for hours. I couldn't. You had no right, David snapped, though his eyes betrayed confusion. He had expected an excuse, but not this. Just then, footsteps approached. Margaret, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled tight, her navy uniform crisp. Her lips pursed when she saw the scene. "Mr. Cole, thank goodness you're home. I tried to keep everything in order, but this young woman refuses to stay in her place." Linda's blood boiled. Margaret had always looked down on her, treating her like an intruder rather than a colleague. Now she was twisting the truth. "Control what situation, Margaret?" David demanded. Margaret lifted her chin. "I told her not to meddle. A new nanny was due today, but she chose to ignore instructions." "There was no nanny," Linda said firmly, though her hands still shook as she held Nathan. "He was alone for hours. I couldn't just leave him." "Silence," Margaret snapped. "You are a housekeeper. Know your role." But Nathan squirmed, reaching away from Margaret, pressing his little face into Linda's neck. His tiny hand gripped her collar as if begging not to be taken. The sight pierced David more than he cared to admit. His son, a boy he hardly knew because of endless work trips, was clinging not to him, not to a senior housekeeper, but to Linda. A cleaner, an invisible shadow. "Margaret," David said slowly, his voice harder. "Now, you said a nanny was coming. Where is she?" She hesitated. "The agency, perhaps a delay. When exactly did you call them?" "This morning," she replied quickly. "That's not true," Linda blurted, her courage trembling but alive. "When I arrived at 7, Margaret wasn't even here. I found Nathan like this. If she had called, she wouldn't have left him suffering." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "How dare you contradict me?" David's mind raced. Something didn't add up. And Nathan's behavior, safe only with Linda, was undeniable. "Enough," David said, his gaze sweeping from one woman to the other. "Margaret, fetch me the agency's number. Now." Margaret stiffened, but obeyed, leaving the kitchen in a rush. Silence fell, broken only by Nathan's babbling. David turned back to Linda. His tone softened slightly, but his pride still wrapped every word. "You must understand this cannot happen again. You were hired to clean, not to take care of my son." Linda met his eyes, tears shimmering. "And if it were you, if you found a child crying filthy abandon, would you turn away because it wasn't your job? Or would you care?" The words hit him like a blow. For the first time in years, David Cole, millionaire, untouchable in control, had no answer. Nathan babbled softly, then rested his head against Linda's shoulder. In that moment, the cold mansion seemed to breathe for the first time. And David realized that the order he prized so much had left his son neglected, while the woman he considered invisible had shown more love in a single morning than wealth had ever bought. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you have children, Linda?" Her eyes clouded with pain. "I had a daughter," she murmured. "Sophie. She's 4 now, but I lost her." David stared, shaken. He had never imagined this quiet housekeeper carried such a wound, and as he looked at his son clinging to her, something deep inside him stirred a mix of envy, guilt, and something he couldn't yet name. David's question hung in the air, suspended between the cold glint of the kitchen's steel counters and the warmth of the small child nestled against Linda's chest. For a long moment, Linda said nothing. Her eyes were downcast, lips pressed tight, as if dragging old memories back to the surface cost her more than she could afford. Finally, her voice came quiet but steady, like someone recounting a wound that had never healed. "I had a daughter, Sophie," she whispered, brushing a damp curl from Nathan's forehead. "She's 4 now, but I don't get to hold her anymore. The court decided that I wasn't enough." David frowned, his gaze locked on her. "Not enough. I didn't have money or a husband or a proper home. Just a rented room, cleaning jobs, and love." Linda's voice broke, but she swallowed hard and forced herself on. "But love wasn't enough for them. They said she needed more stability than I could give. So they placed her with another family. A good family, or at least that's what they told me. I only get letters through the social worker now. She's happy. At least that's what I cling to at night." David felt his throat tighten. He had never seen this woman beyond her uniform, just a shadow gliding silently with a mop and dust rag. Now, in the space of minutes, she was more human, more raw than most people in his corporate world. And Nathan, as if he understood, looked up and babbled a soft sound, "Mama." The words slammed into the room like thunder. Linda froze. "No, Nathan," she corrected softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not your mama. Your mama's in heaven, remember?" She kissed his cheek, eyes wet. David's jaw clenched. His late wife, Marissa, had died giving birth. Nathan had grown up surrounded by strangers, hired to care for him, nannies who came and went, none staying long enough to be more than a face. And now the child had chosen this woman, this cleaner, to fill a void no money had ever bridged. At that exact moment, Margaret returned, clutching a small slip of paper. Her expression was tight, defensive. The agency said there was a misunderstanding. The nanny they meant to send is due tomorrow, not today. I thought it was today. Then Michael Nathan was left alone all morning because of your mistake. David's voice cut sharp. I didn't know Sylvia had left until I arrived at 9, Margaret insisted quickly. I assumed she was still here. Linda's quiet voice broke in. She left last night. I saw her leave with a suitcase. I thought it was just for the weekend, but she never came back. David's head snapped toward Margaret. You said you didn't know she had left. Now you admit you weren't sure. Which is it? Margaret shifted uncomfortably, her fingers worrying the edge of her apron. Sir, there was confusion. I was trying to manage. His tone was icy. My son was alone, filthy, crying himself sick. And you call that managing? Margaret paled, but before she could defend herself further, Nathan yawned in Linda's arms. She instinctively rocked him, humming softly. His eyelids fluttered, and in moments he was asleep, peaceful, trusting. David stared astonished. How did you do that? He never falls asleep so quickly. Usually it takes hours even for the nannies. Linda smiled faintly, her hand stroking the child's back. Children fall asleep when they feel safe. He knows I won't leave him. Those simple words struck David like a blade. He thought of his own interactions with Nathan, hurried greetings, distracted play, half-hearted smiles before phone calls pulled him away. Had his son ever truly felt safe in his arms? Margaret huffed, breaking the moment. Mr. Cole, with all due respect, children become attached to anyone who spoils them. It doesn't mean anything. It's temporary. David's eyes narrowed. Temporary? He's never reacted this way to any nanny, ever. Why now? Because she blurs the lines, Margaret insisted, glaring at Linda. She doesn't know her place. It's dangerous. Linda's cheeks flushed, but her voice stayed calm. What's dangerous about love, Margaret? He was alone suffering. I stepped in because no one else did. David turned on Margaret, anger simmering beneath his usually controlled exterior. And where were you, Margaret? You said you had errands. Was it shopping, or was it your usual salon appointment? Her mouth opened, then closed again. Silence. I see, David said coldly. Linda hesitated, shifting Nathan carefully in her arms. Sir, may I take him upstairs to his crib? He needs proper rest. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, take him. But come back, we're not finished. Linda's steps were careful as she climbed the grand staircase, the child's tiny body pressed against hers. The sight made something stir deep in David's chest, something he didn't want to name. As soon as she disappeared, he rounded on Margaret. 10 years in this household, Margaret, and today I've seen more negligence and lies than ever before. Do you care to explain why? Her voice trembled now, a rare crack in her polished armor. Sir, I thought I was doing what was best. Order, discipline, keeping staff in their place. But yes, I failed today. I didn't expect Sylvia to walk out. And I didn't expect, she faltered. I didn't expect the boy to cling to her like that, like what David pressed. Like she's his mother, Margaret admitted bitterly. David turned away, pacing the kitchen. The words burned him. She was right. Nathan had clung to Linda as if she were the only anchor in a storm. Moments later, Linda returned. Her presence was softer than the tension crackling between them, her hands folded neatly, her eyes lowered. He's sleeping peacefully, she reported. I tidied his room. He was very tired. David gestured to a chair. Sit, I have questions. Margaret folded her arms and remained standing, her disapproval radiating. David leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Linda. Tell me the truth. How long has Nathan struggled with the nannies? She hesitated, glancing nervously at Margaret. Sir, I don't think it's my place. I'm not asking Margaret. I'm asking you. Linda took a shaky breath. They never stayed long. In the last 2 years, at least 8 came and went. Nathan cries a lot when they're here. He doesn't eat well, doesn't sleep well. Sometimes I hear him crying for hours while I'm cleaning nearby. David's chest tightened. And you never told me. I'm just the housekeeper, she said quietly. It wasn't my place. The one time I tried, Margaret told me not to meddle. That's a lie, Margaret burst out, her voice shrill. Is it? David's eyes flashed. Silence. Margaret looked away. Linda lowered her gaze again. I didn't want to overstep. I only stepped in when I couldn't bear to hear him suffer anymore. David sat back, torn between fury at Margaret, guilt at himself, and a strange gratitude toward this woman who had kept his son alive with love he hadn't even noticed. For the first time, the mighty David Cole felt small, humbled in his own home. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about what truly mattered. The kitchen felt heavier than the marble that lined its walls. David sat at the head of the long oak table, his fingers steepled, his eyes dark with thought. Linda sat at the far end, posture, stiff eyes lowered in the presence of her employer. Margaret stood with her arms crossed near the doorway, her expression caught between indignation and fear. For years, David had relied on Margaret's competence. She had run the household with iron discipline, ensuring everything looked pristine, meals were punctual, and staff followed rules. Yet in that moment, David realized a polished surface had hidden deep cracks. His son had been crying, starving, neglected, while his employees argued about roles and rules. He cleared his throat. "Linda, you said," Nathan calmed in your arms almost immediately. "Why do you think that is?" Linda's eyes flicked up briefly, then back down. "Children know who sees them, sir. He knows I pay attention. I don't just do my chores. I notice when he's hungry, when he's tired, when his cries sound different. I don't mean to overstep, I just can't ignore him." Her words, soft yet firm, sliced through the silence. David felt them like a mirror, reflecting all he had failed to do. How often had he come home distracted by emails, giving Nathan a kiss on the forehead, without even noticing the boy's mood? How many milestones had he missed while chasing contracts and mergers? Margaret sniffed. Attachment doesn't prove capability. Anyone can coddle a child and earn temporary affection. Temporary, David repeated, his voice tight. My son has never clung to any nanny like he clung to Linda. Never. If this is temporary, then what has been permanent in his life? Neglect. The words stung even him, but he didn't retract them. Linda swallowed hard. Sir, I never meant to cause conflict. I only wanted to care for a child who needed me. If I've overstepped, I apologize. Nathan's soft cry drifted faintly from upstairs, thin and plaintive. Linda's head turned instinctively toward the sound, her body already half rising. David noticed, Margaret noticed, and something shifted in the room. You hear him, don't you? David asked, astonished. Yes, Linda admitted. I've learned his cries. That one means he woke too soon. He'll need comfort or he won't settle again. Margaret scoffed, but David raised a hand, silencing her. Go, he told Linda quietly. See to him. She nodded and left swiftly, her steps light but urgent. The moment she disappeared, David turned his gaze on Margaret. 10 years, Margaret. And today you've let me see what's truly been happening in this house. Not order, not discipline, neglect. How did I not know? Margaret's lips tightened. You've been busy, sir. Away on business. I managed as best I could. You managed appearances, David snapped, not the child. You failed him. Her composure cracked. Sir, I only wanted to keep structure. I thought. You thought wrong. His voice was ice. Upstairs, the crying stopped. The silence that followed was profound, almost holy. When Linda returned, Nathan was in her arms again, drowsy but calm, tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her uniform. She hummed softly, and he laid his head on her shoulder. David's chest tightened at the sight. He had never known his son could look so safe, so content. For the first time, he envied someone who had less wealth than anyone in his circle, but seemed to hold everything that mattered. He rose slowly, moving closer, his voice quieter now. Linda, tell me about your daughter. Her breath caught. Sophie, she said softly. She's 4. She was all I had. I worked every job I could, cleaning, babysitting, whatever kept a roof over us. But when her father abandoned us, I couldn't provide the kind of home the court wanted. They said she deserved better, a family with money, stability. I fought, but I lost. Now I only get letters once a month. Pictures sometimes. She looks happy. That's what matters. Her voice cracked. But I would give anything to hold her again. David stared, words stolen from him. A cleaner in his mansion, who society would call unworthy, had been robbed of her child not because she didn't love enough, but because she didn't earn enough. And here he was, drowning in wealth, unable to give his son the simplest thing, presence. Linda, he said quietly, I judged you unfairly. She shook her head quickly. You don't owe me anything, sir. I only ask you don't blame Nathan for clinging to me. He just needs... She looked down at the boy who stirred in her arms, and her voice softened. He needs love that doesn't leave. David's throat ached. He reached out, slowly touching his son's hair. Nathan stirred, opening his eyes. Instead of fussing, he reached a tiny hand to David's sleeve, then clutched Linda's collar with the other, refusing to let go of either. It was as if the child was binding them together. David whispered more to himself than to anyone. Love that doesn't leave. Margaret's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. Sir, please, don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. The household needs clear roles. If you let this woman cross boundaries, there will be chaos. Staff will forget their places. David turned his eyes hard. And what good are places if they leave a child suffering? Margaret faltered, but he pressed on, his voice rising. Tell me, Margaret, how many times has Linda had to feed my son when the nannies didn't? How many times has she been the one who soothed him while the professionals failed? You knew, didn't you? Margaret flushed, caught. Sometimes, when the situation was difficult, I let her help. Let her help. David's laugh was bitter. You mean she saved him? And you resented her for it? Silence. Margaret lowered her gaze. David turned back to Linda. You shouldn't have had to carry this alone. But you did, and today, you've shown me more than I can ever repay. Linda shook her head, tears welling. I didn't do it for repayment, sir. I did it because no child deserves to be unseen. Nathan babbled, suddenly pressing his forehead against her cheek. Then, clear and small, he whispered, Mama. Linda gasped. No, sweetheart, she whispered, her tears falling freely now. I'm not your mama. But David looked at her, his own eyes wet. Maybe you are the closest he's ever had. The three of them stood in that kitchen, one millionaire, one housekeeper, one child, and for the first time the house felt less like a fortress and more like a home. And somewhere deep in his chest, David Cole, the man who thought he had everything, realized he had been the poorest of them all. For years, David Cole had lived by structure, tight schedules, boardroom meetings, and profit margins that never forgave mistakes. Yet here in his own home, all that order crumbled. He had just witnessed a truth that no contract or business negotiation had ever prepared him for his son trusted a housekeeper more than him. He sat heavily at the kitchen table, running a hand through his hair. Linda stood quietly nearby, rocking Nathan gently. The boy's small breaths puffed against her collarbone, steady and content. She hadn't needed instructions, hadn't needed authority. She had only followed instinct, the instinct of a mother who had once been forced to let her own child go. David's voice, when it came, was low, almost uncertain. Linda, what did you study before all this? Before life forced you here? She hesitated, surprised by the question. Early childhood education, she admitted softly. 2 years at State University, I dreamed of becoming a preschool teacher. But when I got pregnant and Sophie's father left, I had to work. Cleaning was steady money. Dreams don't pay rent. David's chest tightened. All this time he had assumed she was just another cleaner, another invisible employee in a beige uniform. But now he saw a woman who had once carried ambition, who had been broken by circumstance, yet had not lost her ability to love. You never told anyone, he murmured. It wasn't relevant to dusting shelves and polishing floors, she said with a faint, weary smile. The door creaked, and Margaret stepped back in, trying to recover her authority. Sir, if we allow staff to indulge personal stories, discipline disappears. The child will grow confused if this woman continues to blur boundaries. David rose from his seat, anger flashing in his eyes. Confused, he was abandoned today, neglected, alone in his crib for hours, while the nanny you vouched for ran away and you lied about replacements. And the only reason he is calm now is because he pointed at Linda, did what no one else did. She cared. You call that confusion, I call that salvation. Margaret flushed her lips, pressed thin, but she did not answer. Linda swallowed hard, her arms tightening around Nathan. Mr. Cole, please, she whispered. I don't want to cause trouble between you and Mrs. Margaret. She's been here for years. I'm only temporary. David's gaze locked onto her. No, don't call yourself that. Something shifted in his tone, a crack in the cold marble of his authority. Linda froze, unsure what to say. Nathan stirred, then reached his tiny hand toward David, catching a fold of his shirt. The gesture pierced him deeper than any argument. His son wanted both of them. Linda, David said slowly, I've hired professionals with perfect resumes, and all they gave me was paperwork and reports. But you, his voice caught, surprising him. You gave my son peace. That is not temporary. That's what he needs. Margaret, sensing her influence slipping away, stepped forward. Sir, you must think carefully. One day of chaos doesn't erase 10 years of service. Structure is what holds this home together. David turned, his eyes steel. And what good is structure if it leaves my child crying alone? Silence fell like a gavel. Margaret lowered her gaze, her authority crumbling. David stepped closer to Linda. Do you know how many times you've actually saved him? She shook her head. I don't count. I only do what I must. When the nannies came late or left early or refused to adjust when he wouldn't eat, I stepped in, maybe 10, maybe 15 times. Always in emergencies. 15 times, David's heart burned with shame. 15 times his son had needed care, and he hadn't even known. Nathan babbled sleepily, his fingers still clutching Linda's collar. Then, as if sealing the moment, he whispered again, "Mama." Linda's tears spilled over. "No, my love," she murmured, kissing his temple. "Your mama's in heaven." David's throat ached. "Maybe heaven sent him another," he whispered under his breath, though he wasn't sure she heard. Margaret looked stricken. "Sir," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Enough. This house will not run on appearances anymore. It will run on what's best for my son. If that means tearing down the old rules, so be it." He turned back to Linda. His voice steadied. "Linda, if I asked you not to just clean my house but to stay as Nathan's caregiver, his constant, not his emergency solution, what would you say?" Her eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not qualified. I don't have papers or a degree. You are not just anything," David interrupted firmly. "You are the person my son trusts most. That's more qualification than any certificate I've ever signed." Her lips trembled. "And what if I fail him? What if I get too attached and lose him the way I lost Sophie? I don't think I could survive that again." David's voice softened, stripped of pride. "Then don't think of it as a job. Think of it as family, because that's what you are to him now. And maybe what you can be to both of us." The words hung in the air, bold and terrifying. Margaret gasped softly, but David didn't look away. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held something vulnerable, something real. Linda's heart thudded in her chest. She looked at Nathan, at his peaceful face pressed against her shoulder. She thought of Sophie, her little girl she couldn't hold. She thought of nights she had cried into her pillow, begging for a second chance at motherhood. And now here it was, staring back at her in the form of a wealthy man who for the first time seemed willing to put love above rules. I don't know," she whispered. "I need time." "Take all the time you need," David replied softly. "But while you think, stay today. Show me. Teach me. Let me see what it means to really be present for my son." Linda nodded slowly, emotion choking her. She knew nothing about what tomorrow might bring, but for today, she knew one thing for certain: she would not let Nathan cry alone again. As she rocked him, his little mouth curved into a sleepy smile. And for the first time in years, the mansion did not feel like stone and steel. It felt like hope. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows, painting golden stripes across the polished floor of the Cole mansion. The house seemed quieter now, though, not because it was empty, rather because a different kind of presence filled the space. Linda sat in the living room, Nathan resting in her lap, while David lingered nearby, watching with an intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. Nathan was awake again, cheerful now, babbling as he stacked colorful blocks Linda had placed in front of him. Every so often he would glance up at her, as if to check she was still there. Each time she smiled, murmured encouragement, and the boy's grin widened. David had seen many things in his life: billion-dollar contracts, world leaders across polished tables, skyscrapers rising from the ground at his command. Yet none of those sights had hit him with the force of his son's simple joy in that moment. Nathan wasn't just playing with blocks. He was discovering trust, safety, and connection, things David realized he had barely given him. "How do you know to do that?" David asked, suddenly breaking the quiet. Linda looked up. "Do what, sir?" "Set the blocks like that. Encourage him without taking over." Her lips curved faintly. Children need freedom to explore. Too much control stifles them. Too little and they feel lost. You balance it by watching, guiding gently. "He knows I'm here if he needs me, but he also knows he can try on his own." David sat down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "And how do you know all that?" "Just from your studies." "Partly," she admitted, "but mostly from Sophie. She taught me more in 2 years than any classroom did." Her voice softened, aching. "When you live for a child, you learn quickly. You have to." A silence followed. Nathan babbled, toppling the tower of blocks, clapping at the noise. Linda clapped with him, laughing lightly. David found himself smiling despite the heaviness in his chest. "Would you teach me?" he asked suddenly. Her head jerked, startled. "Teach you?" "Yes, all of this. Feeding him, playing, understanding his cries. I don't want to just watch anymore. I want to learn." The words surprised even him. He had never admitted weakness, never asked anyone to guide him. Yet with his son, ignorance weighed heavier than pride. Linda studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his tone, no superiority, just honesty, vulnerability. It unnerved her. If you're willing to listen, I'll teach you, she said softly. He nodded once firmly as if sealing a contract. At that moment, Margaret entered carrying a clipboard trying to reassert her authority. Sir, the weekly household expense reports have arrived. I'll place them in your office. David barely glanced at her. Later. And the grocery list, she began. Leave it. His tone was clipped dismissive. Margaret hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and Linda. For the first time in years, she was no longer the center of his trust. She opened her mouth, then closed it again and retreated, her footsteps echoing sharply across the marble. David turned back to Linda. What's next? Linda blinked. Next. Yes. Teach me. What do we do after blocks? She smiled faintly, adjusting Nathan on her lap. He usually eats around now. But there's no puree left. David frowned. What do you mean, no puree? The jars ran out yesterday, Linda explained carefully. I brought some homemade food with me just in case. I've noticed Nathan prefers it to the processed jars. You brought food for him. David's voice carried both astonishment and guilt. I often do, she admitted, on days when I thought he might need it. Just simple vegetable mash or chicken soup, nothing fancy. His gaze darkened. And no one told me. No one asked, she said gently. The shame burned deep. He had assumed his wealth guaranteed the best for his son. Yet here was proof love and foresight had come from the woman he barely noticed. Show me, he said at last. So Linda rose, carrying Nathan into the kitchen. She set him carefully in a high chair, fastening the straps. Then she took a small thermos from her bag, unscrewing the lid. The smell of warm carrots and chicken filled the air. David stood beside her as she tested the temperature on her wrist, scooping a small spoonful. Nathan squealed with anticipation, tiny fists banging the tray. Would you like to feed him? Linda asked gently. David hesitated. His hands, used to signing contracts and gripping steering wheels, suddenly felt clumsy. I might do it wrong. You won't, she said firmly. Children don't need perfection, they need presence. That's enough. He sat, lifting the spoon. What now? Let him see it first. Smell it. Don't rush. Then when he opens his mouth, offer a small taste. David followed her instructions. Nathan leaned forward eagerly, lips opening. The food went in, and he squealed again, clapping. David's chest swelled with something unfamiliar, pride not in himself but in the connection. He offered another spoonful, slower this time, watching his son's reactions with wonder. He likes it, David murmured. He loves it, Linda corrected softly. And he loves that you are the one giving it. The realization hit hard. For the first time, his son wasn't a duty or responsibility on paper. He was a boy with shining eyes and sticky fingers who wanted his father. Spoon after spoon, David fed him. Nathan giggled, smearing puree across his cheek, then grabbed his father's hand with surprising strength. He's never done that before, David whispered. Because he's never felt this before, Linda replied. Your full attention. Her words sank deep, heavier than any lesson in a lecture hall. By the time the thermos was empty, Nathan's belly was round, his eyes drooping again. David wiped his little mouth with an awkward gentleness, then lifted him from the chair. The boy nestled against his chest, sighing contentedly. David froze, overwhelmed by the weight, the warmth, the trust. He's asleep already. Linda nodded, her eyes warm. Children rest easily when they feel safe. He knows he has you now. David swallowed hard, his heart thundering. For the first time since Marissa's death, he felt like a father, not just in title but in truth. He looked at Linda standing close, her expression soft. Gratitude welled inside him, stronger than he had words for. You've given me more in one afternoon than all the experts and nannies I've ever hired, he said quietly. You've given me my son. And Linda, tears glimmering, whispered back. And he's given you back your heart. Evening shadows stretched long across the mansion's marble floors. The house that had always felt cold like a museum of wealth now carried an unfamiliar warmth. David held Nathan close, his son's soft breath tickling his neck, while Linda stood a few steps away quietly, tidying toys scattered on the living room rug. For years, David had believed success meant distance, providing through money, not presence. Yet here was a truth, so plain it hurt. All his wealth had left his son hungering for the one thing money could never buy. Mr. Cole, Linda's voice was gentle, hesitant. Would you like me to put Nathan to bed? David looked down at the little boy in his arms. Nathan was drowsy, eyelids heavy, but he stirred at Linda's voice, clutching his father's shirt tighter, as if afraid he might vanish. David hesitated. Teach me how, he said finally. Show me what you do. Linda blinked, surprised. You want to? Yes. His tone left no room for doubt. So she led him up the grand staircase into the nursery, filled with soft light and pastel colors. She guided him step by step how to change Nathan's diaper without waking him fully, how to slip tiny arms into fresh pajamas, how to hum softly while moving slowly, so the child never startled. David listened as if she were teaching him the most important skill in the world, because to him it was. When Nathan was finally settled into his crib, David lingered, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. He looked so peaceful, he murmured, almost in awe. Linda smiled faintly. That's how children should always sleep. Safe, loved. Something cracked inside him, then a dam breaking. He turned toward her, his voice lower, rawer than she had ever heard. I've failed him, haven't I? Linda's expression softened. No, sir. You've been busy. You thought providing money was enough. Many parents do. But now you see differently. That doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human. And it gives you a chance to change. Her words, simple yet profound, struck deeper than any business mentor's advice ever had. They stood there in silence for a moment, listening to the faint sound of Nathan's steady breathing. Then Linda whispered, He'll wake in a few hours, likely thirsty. He usually wants warm water in a small cup. David frowned. How do you know all these details? She hesitated, glancing down. Because I've been here, sir. Cleaning, yes, but listening too. Watching him. Learning his rhythms. She paused, her throat tight. When you love a child, you notice everything. David exhaled slowly, realizing how blind he had been. His own son's patterns, cries, and needs, things he should have known intimately, were better understood by the woman scrubbing his floors. When they stepped back into the hallway, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Margaret appeared at the far end, stiff-backed as if patrolling her territory. She approached with clipped steps, her voice sharp. Sir, may I have a word in private? David's eyes narrowed. Say what you need here. Margaret's lips thinned. This arrangement is improper. You cannot allow a housekeeper to assume the role of mother. It disrupts order, blurs lines, and undermines authority. Linda's shoulders tensed. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but David raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes bore into Margaret's with a force that made her falter. Order, he said coldly. What order leaves a child crying for hours? What authority covers neglect with excuses? You talk of roles, Margaret, but tell me when Nathan was alone, who answered his cries? You, the nanny you vouched for. No! It was Linda. Margaret's face flushed crimson. I have served this family faithfully for 10 years. And today, David cut in his voice, Steele, you failed. And worse, you resented the one person who stepped in. Do not mistake length of service for loyalty. Margaret's chin trembled. For once, she had no retort. She bowed her head, murmuring, I only wanted to maintain standards. Standards don't feed a hungry child, David snapped. Standards don't soothe him when he cries. He gestured toward Linda. This woman whom you treated as invisible gave my son more love in a single day than all your rules combined. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Cole, please. I don't want anyone to lose their place because of me. David looked at her, then really looked. And that he said softly is the difference. Even after everything you defend her, that is what makes you worthy. Margaret's eyes brimmed with humiliation, but David didn't soften. From this moment, things change. If you cannot accept that you may leave. The silence stretched. Then Margaret whispered, I will adapt. David nodded curtly, then turned back to Linda. His tone softened again, worlds away from the cold command he had just wielded. Will you stay for dinner with us? Not as staff, as family. Linda's breath caught. She looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the faint hope hidden in his voice. And then she looked down at her hands, scarred from years of scrubbing, calloused from endless labor. A family? Could she dare to believe in that word again? I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, he murmured. Her eyes filled with tears. For so long she had been treated as invisible, her love for children seen as meddling, her dreams dismissed as weakness. Yet here stood a man of power, asking her to step into the light, not as a servant, but as something more. Finally, her lips trembled into a fragile smile. Yes, I'll stay. The tension that had gripped the mansion all day seemed to ease. For the first time, it felt less like a palace of stone and more like a home. David exhaled, a weight lifting. Then tonight we begin again. As Linda nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, Nathan stirred faintly in the nursery, his small voice murmuring a single word through the monitor on the wall, Mama. And this time, Linda didn't correct him. Dinner at the Cole mansion had always been a formal affair. Silver cutlery polished until it gleamed, crystal glasses lined neatly in a row, and meals served with clockwork precision by staff who remained invisible once the plates touched the table. But that night, something shifted. The dining room glowed under soft chandeliers, yet it wasn't the luxury that drew attention. It was the sight of David at the head of the table, not with his phone or a briefcase beside him, but with Nathan perched on his lap. The little boy smacked the polished wood with tiny hands, giggling, while Linda hovered uncertainly nearby. "Sit," David said firmly, nodding to the chair beside him. "You're not serving tonight. You're part of this meal." Linda hesitated. In 3 years of working here, she had never once been invited to sit at this table. She had always eaten her plain meals quickly in the staff quarters. Now, with her uniform still damp from the earlier chaos, she felt out of place under the glittering chandelier. "Mr. Cole, I shouldn't." "You should," he interrupted gently. "If we're to rebuild this house into a home, it begins here, with us, together." Nathan babbled, reaching his small hand toward Linda, as if to insist she sit. The choice was no longer hers alone. With a shaky breath, she lowered herself into the chair. Margaret entered carrying a tray, her face carefully neutral. She set down bowls of soup, roast chicken, and fresh bread. For once, she did not lecture about seating or etiquette. Instead, she quietly stepped back, observing from the shadows. Something about the atmosphere tonight was beyond her control. The meal began awkwardly. David spooned mashed potatoes onto Nathan's plate, fumbling as the child grabbed the spoon and smeared it across the tablecloth. Linda reached for a napkin instinctively, but David raised a hand. "No. Let me try." He leaned closer, murmuring encouragement as Nathan clumsily scooped food. Some spilled onto his lap, but the boy squealed with triumph at every successful bite. David laughed an unguarded sound. Linda had never heard from him. "He's proud of himself," Linda observed softly. David nodded, wiping his son's chin with exaggerated care. "So am I." For a moment, the house was filled, not with silence or orders, but with laughter and the clatter of small hands exploring independence. As the meal continued, David turned to Linda. "Tell me something. What would your ideal day with Nathan look like if you could decide freely?" She blinked, startled by the question. "My ideal day? Yes. Imagine it's your responsibility. No restrictions, no rules from anyone else. What would you do?" She hesitated, fingers twisting in her lap. Then she spoke her words, painting a picture that drew even Margaret's reluctant attention from the doorway. "I'd start with a morning routine, gentle but steady. Breakfast, some music, to make him laugh, maybe time in the garden, so he feels the Sunday children need nature, fresh air, not just walls. Then stories, songs, sensory play, things that let him learn through touch and sound. After lunch, a nap. Afternoons for exploration, blocks, colors, textures. Let him crawl in the grass, get messy, learn independence. Evenings would be calmer, quiet, play warm bath lullabies until he sleeps safe and loved." Her voice trembled as she finished. "It's simple, really. Children don't need perfection, they need presence." David leaned back, absorbing every word. His chest tightened. "Presence. That's what I've denied him." Margaret cleared her throat, trying to reassert herself. "Sir, while her ideas are imaginative, we must remember she is not a trained professional. We cannot entrust a child's future to sentiment." David turned his eyes sharp. "And yet professionals have come and gone, leaving Nathan crying. Her sentiment is the only reason he's thriving right now." Margaret's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Linda lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed. "I don't claim to be perfect, sir. I've made mistakes in life. Big ones. I lost Sophie. That still haunts me every day." David's expression softened. "You didn't lose her because of who you are. You lost her because society measured love against wealth. That's their mistake, not yours." Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected compassion from him, not here, not now. Nathan, oblivious to the heaviness, reached between them, smearing food on David's sleeve before clapping with delight. Linda laughed through her tears, and David chuckled, shaking his head. "Looks like he's chosen his team," David murmured. "Looks like we don't have a choice," Linda whispered back. After dinner, the three moved into the living room. Linda sat cross-legged on the rug, Nathan crawling between her and his father, giggling as they both clapped when he toddled a few steps on unsteady legs. David watched his son's joy, then glanced at Linda. For the first time in years, his home wasn't just filled with wealth, it was filled with life. As the night deepened, Nathan grew drowsy. Linda hummed a soft lullaby, her voice carrying a tenderness that made David's chest ache. He watched as his son nestled into her shoulder, his tiny mouth forming the same word he had said earlier, "Mama." Linda froze, her eyes brimming. He shouldn't. David stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her arm. Maybe he should. Maybe that's exactly what he needs. Margaret, still watching from the shadows, exhaled quietly. She had resisted this change all day, but even she could no longer deny what she saw. The boy had chosen. That night, as Linda laid Nathan gently in his crib, David stood beside her. He watched his son's peaceful face, then whispered, "You've given him something I never could. And you've given me a chance to be the father I should have been. Don't take that away." Linda's heart twisted. She wanted to believe, but she had lost before. Could she risk loving again, only to lose everything a second time? As if sensing her fear, Nathan stirred, reaching out even in his sleep, his small fingers brushing hers. Linda closed her eyes. Perhaps love was worth risking, even if it meant breaking all the old rules. And in that quiet nursery, surrounded by shadows and the steady breath of a sleeping child, a new kind of family began to take root. Morning came with a pale light spilling through the tall curtains of the Cole mansion. For years, the household woke to schedules dictated by Margaret's meticulous lists: breakfast at 7, sharp cleaning rotations at 9, deliveries checked at 10. But this morning began differently. David awoke not to the buzz of his phone or the shuffle of staff, but to a soft sound from the nursery laughter. He rose quickly, pulling a shirt over his shoulders, and followed the sound down the hall. There he found Linda on the carpeted floor with Nathan. She had arranged his toys into small groups, blocks in one corner, picture books in another, and a basket of wooden animals at his side. Nathan babbled excitedly as Linda pretended to make the wooden cow walk across the rug. "Moo," she said gently, and Nathan squealed, clapping. "Moo," he echoed, his first attempt at copying the sound. David froze in the doorway, watching in awe. His son had spoken a new word, and he had almost missed it. Almost, but not this time. "He said it," David whispered. Linda looked up, smiling. "Yes, he's learning quickly. He's ready for more words, more play that builds his speech." David stepped inside, lowering himself awkwardly onto the rug. "Teach me," he said simply. So she placed a wooden bird in his hand. "Say the words slowly, clearly. Let him see your lips move." David lifted the toy. "Bird." Nathan giggled, reaching for it. "Beer," he said, close but not perfect. David's chest swelled. He's trying." Linda nodded, her voice warm. "Every attempt matters. Encouragement is everything." They played together for nearly an hour. For the first time, David wasn't thinking about contracts or meetings. He was simply present, laughing when Nathan toppled a block tower, clapping when he tried another new sound, marveling at each small triumph. Margaret entered quietly with a tray of tea, clearly intending to remind David of his routine. But she stopped short, her lips pressed into a line at the sight of her employer crawling on the floor with his son, laughing freely. "Sir," she said stiffly, "your office has called twice already. They require your signature on the Tokyo contract." David didn't look up. "Tell them they'll have to wait." Margaret's eyes widened. "Wait, sir, but the deal is—" "I said they'll wait," David repeated firmly, his hand steadying Nathan as he tried to stand. "Right now, this is more important." Linda glanced at him, startled. The man who once measured his worth by numbers on a screen was now choosing blocks and baby words over billion-dollar contracts. Margaret placed the tray down harder than necessary. "Very well," she muttered, retreating, her pride stung. Later, as Linda prepared Nathan's breakfast, a soft porridge she made from fresh fruit and oats, David leaned against the counter, watching. "You bring something alive into this house," he said suddenly. "Do you know that—" She looked down, stirring the porridge. "I'm just doing what any mother would." "But you're not just any mother," he replied. "You're the mother my son needed when no one else stepped up." Her spoon stilled. "Don't say that. I'm not his mother. That's a role that can't be mine." David's gaze softened. "He calls you Mama, and every time he does, he looks at you with peace. Don't dismiss what he feels." Her chest tightened. She had spent 2 years trying to quiet the ache of losing Sophie, telling herself she had no right to be called mother again. But Nathan's small voice, innocent and insistent, was breaking down every wall she had built. Breakfast passed with more laughter than the house had heard in years. Nathan smeared porridge across his cheeks, giggling as David tried to wipe him clean. Linda watched them, her heart torn between joy and fear. When Nathan was finally down for his nap, David asked Linda to sit with him in the study. "I need to say this plainly," he began, his tone shifting to the seriousness of a man used to negotiations. "Yesterday showed me everything wrong with how I've lived. I buried myself in work, thinking money could raise my son. But it left him lonely, and it left me blind. Linda, I don't want that anymore. I want you to stay not just as a housekeeper. I want you to be his caregiver, his anchor, and I want you to help me learn to be his father." Linda's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Mr. Cole." "David," he corrected softly. "If we're to do this, call me David." She swallowed hard. "David, do you understand what you're asking? This isn't a temporary favor. If I stay in Nathan's life like this, it won't be just a job for me. It will be love. And love means risk. I know what it feels like to lose a child. I don't think I could bear it again." His voice was quiet but firm. "Then we don't think about loss. We think about building, about giving him what neither of us had, the security of love that doesn't leave." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. What if he remarried and a new wife cast her aside? What if society judged her a poor cleaner unfit to stand in a millionaire's family? As if sensing her turmoil, Nathan stirred through the baby monitor, a small cry echoing in the room. Linda rose instinctively, but David placed a hand gently on her arm. "Teach me," he said again. "Let me go this time." Together they walked to the nursery. David lifted his son, whispering softly, imitating Linda's soothing tone. Nathan squirmed at first, then calmed his head, resting against his father's chest. David rocked him, humming the lullaby he had heard Linda sing the night before. Off-key, imperfect, but real. Nathan's cries faded into soft sighs. David looked at Linda, astonished. "He's asleep again," she smiled through tears. "Because he knows now. He knows his father won't leave." In that quiet moment, David Cole, the man the world called untouchable, felt his heart open wider than it ever had. And Linda, watching father and son together, realized that maybe, just maybe, love was worth the risk after all. The days that followed blurred into something new for the Cole mansion. What had once been a house run by rigid schedules and cold efficiency now pulsed with life, laughter, and unexpected tenderness. David began working from home more often, determined not to miss the small milestones he had once brushed aside. On the third morning, Linda found him already in the nursery before she arrived. He was crouched on the carpet, tie hanging loose around his neck, as Nathan toddled toward him on unsteady legs. David's arms stretched out, steady and waiting. The boy stumbled, fell, but David caught him before he hit the floor, lifting him high with a laugh that startled even himself. "You did it, son. You walked 3 steps, David exclaimed, his voice full of wonder. Nathan giggled, clapping his hands, and Linda watched from the doorway, her heart tight. These were moments she had once dreamed of giving Sophie, moments of presence, not just survival. Seeing David seize them now stirred both joy and grief within her. Later that afternoon, the three sat in the garden. Linda spread a blanket on the grass, and Nathan crawled happily across it, reaching for leaves and pointing at birds overhead. David lay beside him, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a millionaire and more like a father rediscovering childhood through his son's eyes. "He said tree yesterday," David told her proudly. "And today he tried to say bird." Linda smiled, brushing a curl from Nathan's forehead. "His language is blossoming because he feels safe. Children learn fastest when they feel secure." David nodded slowly, then turned to her. "You're teaching me more than I ever expected, not just about Nathan, about what matters." Her eyes dropped. "I'm only giving what I wish someone had given me. Sophie deserved this kind of stability. Instead, the world judged me by what I didn't have, not by the love I did." David's hand tightened in the grass. "It was wrong, and I'll make sure you never face that kind of judgment here again." Linda looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," David said firmly, "I want you here. Permanently. Not as staff, not as a temporary solution. As Nathan's caregiver officially." Her heart pounded. "David, I told you that's dangerous for me. If I let myself love him like my own and then lose him." "You won't lose him," David interrupted, his voice steady. "Not while I have breath in me." Before Linda could reply, Margaret appeared at the edge of the garden. She looked smaller these days, her rigid authority diminished. Yet her expression was softer than before, almost resigned. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, the nanny agency called again. "They've found another candidate." David didn't even glance at her. "Cancel it." Margaret hesitated. "Sir, are you certain? This arrangement? It is unusual." He finally turned his eyes hard. "Unusual doesn't mean wrong. My son has thrived more in the last 3 days than in the last year. If that's unusual, then I'll take it. Cancel the nanny." Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. For once she didn't argue. She simply nodded and left. Linda's pulse raced. "David, are you sure? Do you understand what people will say? A millionaire entrusting his only son to a housekeeper." "To a woman who loves him," David corrected, "and who has shown me more about fatherhood than anyone else. Let people talk. I don't care." Nathan crawled back to Linda, then tugging her hand, babbling happily. She scooped him up, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Tears blurred her vision as his little arms wrapped around her neck. That evening, David asked Linda to join him in the study once Nathan was asleep. She entered nervously, the dark wood and heavy shelves, reminding her of all the distance that usually separated them. But David wasn't behind the desk this time. He was seated on the sofa, 2 glasses of water set on the low table. "Sit," he said quietly. She obeyed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice more vulnerable than she'd ever heard. "For years, I measured my worth by wealth. I thought if I built an empire, my son would have everything. But yesterday, when he said Dada for the first time, I realized I almost missed the most valuable empire of all family." Linda's throat ached. She wanted to speak, but the lump of emotion silenced her. "I don't want you to be just Nathan's caregiver," David continued. "I want you to finish your degree. I'll pay for it. You deserve to follow your dreams again." Her eyes widened. "David, that's too much." "No," he said firmly. "It's not charity. It's investment. In you, in Nathan, in us. Because if you're here, this house becomes a home. And if you thrive, he thrives." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to accept all this. Loving a child again, it terrifies me. Because love always carries the risk of loss." David leaned closer, his voice low. "And what's the alternative? A life without love. You've already proven your heart is stronger than fear. Nathan has already chosen you. And so have I." Her breath caught. The room spun with emotions she hadn't dared to name. Before she could respond, Nathan's cry rang through the monitor. Both of them froze, then rose at the same time, moving quickly toward the nursery. Inside, Nathan was sitting up in his crib, tears streaming down his cheeks. Linda rushed forward, scooping him into her arms. But when David reached out, something unexpected happened. Nathan leaned toward him, clutching his father's shirt with desperate urgency. David gathered him close, whispering soothing words, rocking gently. And to Linda's amazement, Nathan's cries quieted in his father's embrace, his head resting trustfully against David's chest. David looked up, astonished eyes glistening. He calmed. "For me." Linda's smile trembled through her tears. "Because now he knows you'll stay." In that fragile, perfect moment, the 3 of them stood together, bound not by wealth or rules, but by the fragile, fearless thread of love. For the first time, Linda dared to believe maybe she had not lost motherhood forever. Maybe she had simply been led here to the child who needed her as much as she needed him. And as Nathan drifted back to sleep between them, David whispered the words that would change everything. "We're not just building a new routine, Linda. We're building a family." The following week felt like the dawn of an entirely new season in the Cole mansion. Where once the walls echoed with silence and distant commands, now they pulsed with laughter, lullabies, and the rhythm of small feet pattering across marble floors. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The sterile air of wealth had given way to warmth, and all who entered noticed it. Linda woke each morning with a new sense of purpose. Gone was the quiet resignation that once weighed down her steps. Now when she walked into Nathan's nursery, his eyes lit up and his arms reached eagerly for her. He called her mama without hesitation, his voice pure with innocence, and each time her heart tightened with both joy and fear. One bright morning, David surprised her by joining their play on the carpet. He didn't sit in his crisp suit as before, but in rolled-up sleeves and socks, crawling with Nathan through a makeshift tunnel Linda had crafted from blankets and chairs. The sight was surreal. The same man whose face often graced financial magazines now roaring like a lion, sending his son into squeals of delight. "Who are you, and what have you done with Mr. David Cole, the untouchable millionaire?" Linda teased, laughter dancing in her voice. David grinned, tousling his son's hair. "Maybe he's been hiding under too many contracts. Maybe this is who he was meant to be all along." Linda shook her head, watching the two. "He doesn't need a perfect father, David, just a present one." Her words sank deep into him. Each day he felt himself loosening from the grip of his old world where time was money and love was measured in luxuries. Now time meant something else entirely. First steps, first words, first moments of genuine connection. But not everyone embraced the shift so easily. Margaret continued to hover, her pride bruised by the erosion of her authority. One afternoon, Linda found her in the pantry folding towels with more aggression than necessary. "You've unsettled the house," Margaret muttered, not meeting Linda's eyes. "For 10 years I kept order here. Now everything is different." Linda paused carefully, choosing her words. "Different doesn't mean worse, Mrs. Margaret. It means Nathan is happy. That should matter most." Margaret's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Yet later that evening, Linda caught a flicker of something unexpected in the older woman's gaze as she watched David gently feeding his son. Regret, perhaps. Or the quiet realization that the rules she clung to had never truly served the child. The real turning point came one evening at dinner. The three sat together at the long table plates of roasted chicken and vegetables before them. Nathan babbled happily in his high chair, smearing mashed carrots across his tray. David laughed, shaking his head as he cleaned the mess. "Before you, Linda," he said softly, "I would have called this chaos. Now I see its joy." She looked down, embarrassed by the sincerity in his tone. "Don't give me too much credit. I'm just doing what love demands." "That's exactly why it matters," he replied, his eyes steady on hers. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings neither dared name. Nathan broke it with a giggle, slapping the tray, and Linda reached across to wipe his hands. Their fingers brushed light, accidental but charged. Both pulled back quickly, hearts racing. That night, as Linda tucked Nathan into bed, she whispered softly, "Sleep well, little one. You're safe. You're loved." His tiny hand clutched her finger, and her eyes burned with tears. When she stepped into the hall, David was waiting. His voice was low, almost vulnerable. "Linda, will you stay? Not just for now. Not just until he's older, permanently. As part of our family." She froze her breath, catching. "David, He lifted a hand, his eyes unwavering. "I know it's asking much. I know you've lost before. But I promise you this time will be different. You won't lose him. You won't lose us." Her heart raced. Every part of her longed to say yes, to embrace the home and love she had been denied for so long. Yet fear whispered in her ear, "What if history repeated itself?" As if sensing her hesitation, David added softly, "You don't have to answer tonight. Just think about what Nathan already knows. He's chosen you, and so have I." When she finally retired to her small room, Linda lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling. Sophie's face swam in her memory, her laughter, her small hands the day she was taken. But then came Nathan's face, his trust, his wordless plea each time he reached for her. Maybe love wasn't about possession. Maybe it was about presence, however it came. 2 days later, her answer came naturally. She was in the garden, with Nathan watching him wobble across the grass when he fell and scraped his knee. Tears welled, but before Linda could scoop him up, David rushed forward, kneeling in the dirt in his fine trousers, gathering the boy close. "I've got you, son," he whispered, holding Nathan against his chest. "Daddy's here. Daddy won't let go." Linda's breath hitched at the sight. This was no longer the man who hid behind schedules and staff. This was a father. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't walk away. That evening, after Nathan slept, she found David in the study. He looked up as she entered, his eyes questioning. "Yes," she whispered, tears brimming. "I'll stay. As his caregiver. As family." Relief flooded his face, softening every line. He rose, stepping closer, but stopped short, respectful of her space. "Thank you, Linda. You don't know what this means." She smiled through tears. "I think I do. It means Nathan won't grow up alone. It means love wins even when the world says it shouldn't." They stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling between them. Not as master and servant, not even yet as equals, but as two broken souls daring to build something whole together. From that day forward, the Cole mansion changed for good. Meals were shared, laughter echoed, and Nathan grew in the soil of love, watered daily by presence. Linda studied again in the evenings, with David's support inching closer to her long-lost dream of finishing her degree. Margaret, humbled, found her own redemption in learning from Linda, slowly letting go of pride to embrace compassion. And David, he no longer hid behind his wealth. He found himself in fatherhood, guided by a woman the world once dismissed as invisible. One night, months later, Nathan toddled between them, clutching both their hands. He looked up, his voice clear and sure, "Family." The word broke them both open. Linda wept openly, David's eyes burned, and they bent together over the little boy who had bound them. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. Love had rewritten the story of the Cole mansion. Life often teaches us that wealth, status, and control are illusions if they lack love. True family is not built from marble walls or measured in possessions, but in presence, in the hands that steady us, in the arms that hold us when we fall, and in the voices that remind us we are not alone. Linda thought she had lost motherhood forever, but love returned in a form she did not expect. David believed success required distance until his son taught him that presence was priceless. Together they discovered that healing is possible when hearts are willing to risk again. Let this story remind us, never underestimate the power of showing up with love, Comment below what this lesson means to you, and don't forget to subscribe so we can share more African stories that touch the soul.